Wasn't this supposedly an exemplary model of democracy that is going to spread all around the Muslim world, and everybody is going to clamor to demand that they have some copying of the Iraqi model? In reality, there are no takers.
Alternate Focus interviews Asad Abu Khalil, author of The Angry Arab News Service, a popular online blog about politics, war, the Middle East, Arabic poetry, and art. He is a professor and outspoken proponent for one secular state in Palestine. Abu Khalil grew up in Beirut, Lebanon, and came to the U.S. in 1983, where he received his PhD in comparative government from Georgetown University. He has served as freelance Middle East consultant for NBC and ABC News, and is now a professor of political science at California State University Stanislaus, and visiting professor at UC Berkeley. In this interview, he speaks with us on issues ranging from the heated U.S. elections to the war in Iraq.
I believe the number one factor which explains America's entanglement and heavy involvement in the Middle East is the desire to dominate the world. And I think the Middle East is important because the United States discovered before September 11, but certainly after September 11, that the Arab and Muslim public opinion are defined against U.S. will to dominate the world. They don't like the United States, not for cultural or religious reasons, not because of American way of life. They have no qualms about barbecues and American going to malls and shopping. It's about fundamental political issues. That's what drives Arab antipathy to U.S. political and economic interests, and of course America's support for Israel, the domination of other countries, and wars. I mean, I know this may hurt America's feelings, but Arabs do not find the bombs that fall over their heads to be enjoyable, even if they are with the regards of the American population. And they don't seem to enjoy American occupation, even though Americans think that their occupations and colonization of other land are benign, unlike all other occupations and colonization of other lands. So one is dominating the world, and this is now the conflict with Russia. How dare Russia sends troops across their border because they feel their national security is threatened? Because the United States would never do something like that. The American media and the people are aghast. How dare Russia uses the rubric of national security in order to send troops across their border? I mean, imagine the United States doing that, or even sending troops across, 10,000 miles away to a place like Iraq? We would never do that. The American public would not do that because it's too modest for that. Second reason, of course, are energy resources. The United States is very keenly aware that the largest deposits of proven reserves of oil are found in that part of the world, and they want to make sure that the supply is uninterrupted. Third, of course, are war profiteers. We can in no way underestimate the impact that those people have over the media, over U.S. Congress people, as well as over political culture. I mean, there's something celebrated about these war profiteers. Defense companies are now the pride and glory, I guess, of people in the United States. Fourthly, I think the agenda of the Christian right has not gotten much attention, because I think in the Bush administration, a lot of people focused on the neoconservative, but we lost sight of a lobby that I think was much more influential on Bush's mind, if we can use that expression in the case of that person, and that is the Christian lobby. They have tremendous foreign policy agendas. Look at the way they were influencing the governments on the issue of Darfur in Sudan. Of course, not because of love for the Sudanese people. They have their own sectarian considerations. Their heavy agenda on Israel. And of course, they were supportive of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and against any country provided the citizens are Muslims, preferably. We have also considerations that are related to certain arrogance of power. The United States felt after the end of the Cold War that it's very important to take revenge in a massive way. And people in the United States felt after September 11, we need to kick some ass. I mean, this was the language that was used in congressional hearings. This is the language that was not alien to the US President of the United States. This is why the war on Afghanistan was a war of revenge. supported by 93% of the American population. Nobody asks questions. Nobody asks, are we punishing the right culprits? Are we killing the people who really attacked us on September 11? So all this is totally missing from the picture about what America is doing around the world. And I think we can also add the false lessons of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War have fed some of the worst instincts in the United States. It basically gave some, as if a divine reinforcement of the self-righteousness of this country. As if God decided, because God is very involved in various affairs. People think that God is even supporting the United States against other teams in the Olympics. I mean, that's the nature of religion here in this country. And they believe that the end of the Cold War was a vindication of the arrogant self-righteousness of the United States, and we need to act accordingly. And this characterizes the Clinton administration as well as this administration, and unfortunately, very likely, whatever administration that will come. I mean, I think what's very interesting in watching the American presidential election is the extent to which we have split perceptions about these elections. You see how it's covered in the Middle East, and you see how it's covered here in the United States. Foreign policy is not big at all in the discourse. I mean, you watch the silly coverage today, and so much about the feud between Hillary and between Obama. In the Middle East, there is such attention paid to the nuances and the blatant statements that are being made about the Arab-Israeli question and foreign policy in general. The same is the nature of the coverage in European press. And I think there are certain things remain unchanged. I mean, for people in the Middle East, they notice that American presidential campaigns always are characterized with a stiff competition between the various candidates to prove their own credentials in their pro-Israeli advocacy. Today, there is a new ad just released by the McCain campaign, which basically accuses Obama of not being sufficiently sensitive to threats against Israel from Iran. And of course, people in the Middle East are baffled about this because they find that both Obama and McCain are extremely unconditionally militant in their support and advocacy for Israel above all the other interests that America may have in the Middle East. And yet, it's not enough. I mean, one wonders what else do they want? You see that John McCain is willing to move America's embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Do they also want to move America's embassies from Cairo and Damascus also to Jerusalem? So, I mean, there are all these things going on. And one also notices the disappointment that people have in the Middle East is that you have a rising star in the Democratic Party, somebody who had some progressive background. You talk to people in Chicago, he was very active in pro-Palestinian issues in Chicago. And as you rise up in American politics, and this happened also to Hillary Clinton, your sensitivity to Palestinian concerns diminishes because that's part of the price you have to pay in order to rise up in American presidential politics. And I think what is also lacking is that the way people talk about Iraq and Afghanistan only in terms of US troops. I mean, there is not attention paid to how this is affecting the lives of average Iraqis and Afghans. I mean, there is not anything that's being said about the women of Afghanistan, because the propaganda was that they were liberated. And of course, we read about it in the sophisticated European as well as the Middle East press. Crimes against women continue in Afghanistan. I mean, basically what America did replaced a group of misogynist Taliban with a group of misogynist warlords. And as far as the lives of women in Afghanistan, not much has changed. Basically, the name of their oppressors have changed. And of course, we have American troops and their allies occupying these countries. You have Iraq. Nobody is so talking about the fact that the Iraqis are making it very clear in public opinion surveys and even in negotiations with the puppet government that was installed by the United States that they don't want American troops to stay. I mean, of course, American troops and their allies. Lest I forget that now Mongolian troops are now up to 100, up from 38 soldiers. Now they have 100. Some countries have sent like 3 or 2 soldiers for some reason that are unbeknownst to me. So you watch this campaign and you feel that in the next few years, America's foreign policy, and here our security in America, are going to be suffering because of the crimes that this administration has done in faraway places. And Americans always assume that their intervention abroad, they call it the policeman of the world, to give it the best cover possible, is that intervention, they think, is always innocent, is always well motivated. Unbeknownst to them, America around the world is propping up some of the worst criminals and dictators that are tormenting their own populations. And eventually, of course, this is going to affect us here in the United States in ways that are very worrisome to me, and I think to anybody who knows anything about the region. I mean, as far as the wars in Afghanistan versus the war in Iraq, I mean, you watch the campaigns and you think that it's rather ironic, painfully ironic, the way these candidates talk about them. So one of them wants a surge in Iraq, and he thinks American foreign policy is going to be served by that surge in Iraq. We have the other candidate, and that's supposedly the peace candidate, the Democrats candidate. He wants a surge, but he wants that surge in Afghanistan, where, of course, we have seen a resurgence for the Taliban and so on. So basically, I don't understand. Somebody should ask these two candidates. So you want the United States and the United States troops to be continuously alternating between a surge in Iraq and a surge in Afghanistan, hoping that one would work, and then it seems that every time we concentrate in one country, that things in the other country get worse, and we're going to keep doing that for how long? Is there a timetable for these kind of surges? Apparently, as far as the United States agenda is concerned, there's never a U.S. timetable. It is against U.S. pride to have a timetable. The United States want to have the right to be in any country, anywhere in the world, indefinitely. And when the Iraqi puppets that were installed by the United States were politely asking for some timetable for a few years, the Bush administration, which in the past used to say, we are in Iraq as long as we are demanded by the elected government, they are offended because they asked them for a timetable. So they decided on some new language about a horizon, whatever that means. So, I mean, it's rather theater of the absurd. And I think if you talk to any expert on Afghanistan and Iraq, they will tell you the surge is not working, neither here nor there. There are no prospects. I mean, they basically decided the surge is working because they redefined the mission. So the mission becomes the ability to decrease the amount of casualties for US troops. But what about the larger goals of this administration? Wasn't this supposedly an exemplary model of democracy that is going to spread all around the Muslim world, and everybody is going to clamor to demand that they have some copying of the Iraqi model? In reality, there are no takers. Nobody in the Middle East is asking that they have daily car bombs in their lives, civilians being shot at in American checkpoints, a foreign nasty occupation that bombs villages and towns from the air on weekly basis with civilian casualties mounting. And nobody is asking what kind of definition of success are we talking about. As far as statements on my website regarding my sentiment on the Palestinians, it is rather too sentimental for me to speak about, but sometimes I express my views about the fact that even though I am opposed to nationalism and to flags, I believe that the Palestinians are entitled to have what other countries have, to celebrate their own nationalism, to celebrate their own state. And let me hear, I was reading it on the plane, quote from the Palestinians' foremost poet, Mahmoud Darwish, who just passed away recently. I read in his book, State of Siege, he said, let us have our state, and then let us disagree on everything else, even the shape of the flag, the nature of the government. And I am going to be one of those people. Once there is a state, I will join in criticizing the government, the factions, the kind of setup that the Palestinians will come up with. But I think it's fair to say that they are entitled to what other countries and what other peoples have. Well, on the subject of Syria and Syrian-Israeli talks, the United States is not involved at all. The United States, in fact, has been opposed to Syrian-Israeli talks. The United States has, since the beginning of this administration, been of the view that the only way to deal with Arabs is through force. This is the advice they got from their favorite experts, Bernard Lewis and Fouad Ajami. They told them the only language they understand is force. And that's why they have been using it on such massive level, and yet it hasn't seemed to resonate among the Arab and Muslim populations. Perhaps they did not read a warning from Hannah Arendt back from 1950s when she said about the Arab-Israeli question, she was criticizing Zionists, even though she was Zionist herself. She said, I do not understand those Zionists who argue the only language Arabs understand is the language of force, because if anything, when I look back at the first 50 years of this conflict, it is very clear that the one language Arabs do not understand is the language of force. The United States believed that Israel should be allowed to bomb any country at will, and Israel has bombed Palestinian areas, Syria, as well as Lebanon in the last few years, with very little attention here in the United States. Israel, which poses in the campaigns of Democrats and Republicans as this beleaguered state that are under threat from Arab neighbors, has in fact attacked Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. And the United States wanted it to continue in its war against Lebanon, even though it has failed, and the Israeli army was humiliated by a few hundred fighters in South Lebanon. The Syrians in the Israeli talks are done for domestic reasons, and not really, it's a sideshow. I mean, the real show is the fact that the Israeli prime minister is in disgrace for reasons of corruption that are mounting, and he has only a few months in office, and he wants to distract from that kind of attention by saying that he is trying to pursue peace. The Bush administration has advised and counseled him against that, but he wanted to continue. The Syrians have their own reasons. They know nothing is going to come out of it. Neither the Israeli government is in a position to deliver what the Syrian wants, and the Syrians are fully aware that they are way too isolated in the region by virtue of the Saudi-Israeli-American alliance to get any support for leverage in their negotiations, but they feel they have to do it to get out of their European isolation. And this has paid off. Since they started these talks, these fruitless talks through the mediation of Turkey, they have resumed their relations with the French, and the Syrian president was in France, and the French president Sarkozy is going to be in Damascus soon. That's the reason. It's not about Arab-Israeli peace. Just like the peace process in general is really not about peace. It's about allowing the United States, allowing Israel to continue indefinitely to occupy Arab lands and to use as much force as it wants against its enemies. When it comes to the Palestinians, you can say anything in this country because there's very little known. I mean, I point out on my website, the New York Sun newspaper, a few days ago published that Hamas is a Shiite movement supported by Iran. And nobody corrected them, nobody said anything. I mean, some people who sent me what they wrote comments on the website, and that was it. But in print, there was no correction. So imagine when it comes to the celebrated event of what is called Israel's Declaration of Independence. This is shrouded with so many myths and misconceptions in this country than anything I've seen. I mean, I came to this country and I realized apparently poor Israel was attacked by 7 Arab armies. I mean, in reality, of course, these so-called 7 Arab armies never amounted to more than 1/3 of the entire armed forces of the other side that has, as it does today, the latest military technology of warfare. And of course, it's regarded as, and of course, as if the Palestinians were nowhere to be seen. They were not part of the picture. This is why in 1967, some 20 years later after the destruction of Palestine, the United Nations Resolution 242 referred to the Palestinians as a refugee problem, that they have no political right, just as they were not mentionable in the Balfour Declaration in 1917. But look at the Palestinian memory. When I teach the Arab-Israeli question, I always tell them this. The Balfour Declaration was proclaimed on November 2nd, 1917. To this very day, every year, November 2nd, Palestinians march in demonstrations against the Balfour Declaration. People have forgotten about who Balfour was, not the Palestinians. Young people still know what it means. The fact that it gave the birth certificate for the State of Israel. Regarding plans for detention of or internment of Arab Americans or Muslim Americans, I think that these are fears that many Arabs and Muslims in this country have, and I think they are very realistic fear. Personally, I'm not going if they have them. But I will say that after September 11, more than 50% of the American population, according to USA Today poll, believe that American citizens of Arab descent, people like myself, should carry special ID cards. In this kind of climate, you realize that the government can do a lot to basically intrude on the rights and liberties of Arab Americans, and of course, consequently, on the rights of all Americans, but even people would not see it that way. We know that back in the 1990s, there was a immigration plan leaked to the media, which basically talked about the emergency internment of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans. I can tell you, traveling around the country, speaking, meeting a lot of Arabs and Muslims in the United States as well as in Canada, the fears are very real and pressing on the minds of Arabs and Muslims in the United States. And they believe that if we come to that point, and if there is, one hopes not, any future terrorist threat that is linked to Arabs or Muslims, that the United States population would be solidly in favor of doing something of that nature. I mean, look how the Bush administration, with the support of Democrats, let's not lose sight of that. Let's not lose sight the Obama campaign is now in favor of wiretapping on citizens, which it used to be opposed to. And in that climate, I think all is possible, including the internment of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. We now live in an era when one of the most popular pundits and columnists, and she has one of the most popular websites in the United States, Michelle Malkin, comes out with a book justifying, decades later, the internment of Japanese Americans. That's the country we live in now. Well, I mean, I think on the subject of people fear and the intimidation that has been exercised in this country against courageous voices that speak on behalf of the Palestinians, I think it is basically the perpetuation of intimidation. The Israeli lobby and its supporters, and when we say Israeli lobbies, we are talking about tentacles that extend far beyond one segment of the population. I think, for example, the Christian lobby is an important element in the pro-Israeli lobby we should not lose sight of. And they are more vigilant about the support for Israeli aggression and war than many in the American Jewish population. But you don't get that, unfortunately, you don't even get that in the Middle East alternative media sometimes, because they think that the Israeli lobby means the American Jewish population, and the American Jewish population is really largely split on issues of war and peace, more so than the American general population. But that is missing from the coverage. But I think there is so much intimidation. I mean, a few weeks ago, a member of Congress, Dennis Kucinich, saw something I said about Lebanon and called me, and he was talking to me about the issue of Arab-Israeli policies and U.S. foreign policy. And I asked him, I said, when you have these issues debated in Congress, do sometimes these, lowly, uncourageous members of Congress come to you after and tell you, well, we agree with you? But he said it happens so frequently that these members of Congress would say something publicly, and then in private they would say, well, we agree with you, but we can't say this because politically it's very costly. On the subject of the discourse we in the alternative media we need to use, I really think we have a lot of work to do. One of the things that I find alarming in the Middle East as well as here, because I am involved in Arabic alternative media as well as in American alternative media, and I think that sometimes I find the average age of our audiences here and there alarming. So I think there is a certain disconnect. How can we make the discourse and rhetoric of alternative left-wing progressive media palatable to young people? And it seems to me we have to engage in self-criticisms in that regard. One of the things that has troubled me since I came to this country is that why is the tone of alternative media seem to be always dour? I mean, we have a reputation, well-deserved, for being sometimes boring, not able to deliver a message that people can understand. Why do you have an image that if you are for peace and for progressive causes, you have to be serious all the time and not humorous? I mean, this is something I try to do on my website. We have to send a message that, the right wing have done that. The right wing have done this invasion of the radio airwaves through the combination of satire and humor in bad taste a lot of times, but that's what they do. We think that we have to be always self-righteous and always straight and always humorless. And this is a reputation that we have earned deservedly, and I hope that we can break it. We need to connect to young people. This is the success of Daily Show, for example, which is sometimes, I think, closet progressive, and they do a lot of things that the mainstream media do not do, and they do it with humor. Why can't we do that? And the third issue is, we need to try to disentangle ourselves and language from the language of the 1960s. We know that young people have new issues on their mind. We need to be more friendly to issues that may not be big among people of our age or older. We need to be more sensitive to issues of environment, gay and lesbian rights. I mean, a lot of people on the left, I think, still have problems with that issue. We need to address them. Feminist rights. I mean, I think we know that a lot of progressive males still have difficulty in advocating for feminism. And we have a lot to learn in that regard. I also think that we need to be very aware that the way we present our case is almost as important as the substance of what we are presenting. And in that regard, we need to see the way the right and the mainstream media in America have tried to discredit us by associating us with loony conspiracy theories. And I think we have been guilty of that. Don't get me wrong. I always tell people I am an advocate of conspiracy theories, but proven one. Sometimes we are associated with loony conspiracy theories that are not in any way proven. I mean, I think it troubles me when some people that are counted on the left or on alternative media, I mean, you can name names here, who, for example, still don't want to believe that Al-Qaeda was behind September 11. I mean, we need to speak out and say, no, Al-Qaeda was behind September 11. It wasn't the CIA or the Defense Department or the Mossad. We need to really come to grips with some part of reality. Having said that, we need to say, of course there are conspiracies. And when there are conspiracies, we need to point them out and we need to warn against them.